A ring that scorches the hand, yet no fire in sight. Welcome to Eco Mysteriosa. I am your host, Ravela. Share in the mystery, comment where you're listening from. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. On a raw November evening, when the lamps along Baker Street shivered behind their fogged chimneys and a sleet like powdered glass rattled at the panes, I found Holmes in one of those humours of paradoxical languor which, to the uninitiated, passed for indolence, but which I had come to recognize as the crouch of a hunting animal before the spring. He lay at length upon the settee, his long fingers interlaced, his gaze upon the smoke-wreathed ceiling where, in idle whim, he had traced with a violin bow the constellations of our last three clients, the bankrupt baronet, the vanished clerk, and the lady who had mislaid a husband and discovered a fortune. The coal glowed to a dull heart in the grate, and Mrs. Hudson's footsteps faded below like the last polite note of a symphony. "It will snow before dawn," Holmes observed, without the courtesy of turning his head. "Our visitor's coachman will swear it is rains by 8:30, and a certain cab with a sprung near-side spring will beat the bell at St. Bartholomew's by 9. "You expect a visitor, then?" said I, removing my damp gloves. He indicated the mantel with the slightest of gestures. Upon it lay a card upon which the printer had expended his blackest ink and most compendious capitals: Sir Elliot Wainwright, B.T., of Wainwright Hall, Surrey. "Director, Phoebus Colonial Company. Sir Elliot Wainwright is known to me by reputation," I remarked. "A philanthropist in print, an expansionist at dinner, and a tireless committeeman at Whitehall. And," Holmes murmured, "in all probability the most frightened man in London." He had no opportunity to amplify the paradox, for the bell below sounded with an urgency one associates with fire or scandal, and the next moment our door flew open to admit a gentleman of perhaps 55. Tall, loose-limbed, his cheeks ruddy from exposure, his moustache crisp with frozen breath, and his right hand swathed in a strip of linen that had, I could not but note, been hastily dipped in some ointment that gave off an acrid aromatic scent. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he cried, and then, catching sight of me, recovered himself sufficiently to bow. "And Dr. Watson, I beg your pardon for bursting in like a burglar, but I am in need of your—" He faltered, his jaw working. "Your particular sort of help." "Pray be seated, Sir Elliot," Holmes said, rising with a manner that was the very model of cold civility. "The hand first, if you please." Our visitor glanced at the swaddled member as if it were a stranger. "It is ridiculous." "It is more than ridiculous. It is infernal. Look for yourself, sir." He unwound the linen. The hand beneath was a handsome one, broad of palm and capable, yet across the flesh of the third finger, where a wedding ring should have sat, there ran a blistered wheal, angry and raised, which circled the digit like the welt of a rope. The skin had peeled in a crescent, and the surrounding flesh was mottled with a dusky, almost soot-like hue. I leaned forward with the trained curiosity of my profession. The injury had the appearance not of a cut, nor of a burn from flame, but of contact with a heated metal, prolonged just long enough to do a devilish but exact work. "You perceive the difficulty," Sir Elliot said hoarsely. "It is the mark of my wife's ring, which you are not wearing," Holmes remarked. Sir Elliot's eyes flickered. "I know, not since last night." Holmes offered him the chair by the fire and took up his lens. "You will oblige me by recounting your day from yesterday's luncheon to the present hour without embroidery, and pausing only when I interrupt." Sir Elliot swallowed. "I lunched with a director of the Phoebus Company at the Athenaeum. I returned to our house in Grosvenor Place at 4, worked in my study until 7, and dressed for a small dinner at the Dorincourts in Eaton Square. My wife did not accompany me. She was indisposed with a headache. I returned at 11:30. It was then—" He stopped and looked about him as a man might gaze into a fog for the lamp he knows must be there and yet cannot see. "It was then," Holmes encouraged him gently, "that something occurred concerning your ring." Sir Elliot nodded, and his large frame shivered. "I went to my dressing-room. I wear my father's signet upon my left hand, and my wedding band upon the right, as is our family habit. I had placed them in my jewel dish before I dressed. The signet was where I left it. The wedding ring, my wife's ring, was also there. When I picked it up, he lifted his eyes to us with a look I shall not forget. It burned me, Mr. Holmes. The metal burned like a coal. It left this mark. And yet," He spread his hands, beseeching sanity from us. And yet when I dropped it and cried out, my valet came running. He took up the ring from the floor at once and felt nothing. He swore there was no heat at all. Holmes's lashes lowered in that peculiar way they had when his mind slipped into its fine, calculating gear. Was the ring examined by any other person? Your wife, for example. My wife was already asleep. I did not wake her. Harridge, the valet, put the ring back in the dish. I told him to leave it, and this morning I dared not touch it. I had the hand dressed by our physician, Dr. Rook, and came straight here. Excellent, Holmes said. Pray describe the ring, plain gold of my great-grandmother's making. It bears within the words "until the sun forgets" in a small old-fashioned script. Holmes's mouth twitched, the nearest thing he ever got to a smile. Poetry in plate. And the ring has never before behaved in this theatrical manner. Never, but there is more. Twice this last week, certain objects in our house, trifles, have been displaced. A paper knife left point down in the blotter. A drawing-room chair set half an inch from its accustomed place. A scent, odd bitter, about my study after I had locked it. Harridge says I imagine it. My wife, he hesitated. My wife believes we are plagued by mischief, as by some malicious spirit. I do not credit such things. But I tell you plainly, last night that ring burned me as if hell itself breathed through it. Holmes glanced at me. You perceive, Watson, the rarest of all visitors, a rational man in possession of an irrational fact. It may be less irrational than it seems, I ventured. A chemical irritant upon the surface. Sir Eliot shook his head. I bathed the finger at once. If it were mere irritation, would the pain have been so instant and the mark so? He thrust the hand toward me again with a resentful pride, as if the wound had insulted him. Holmes had stepped to the window. He lifted the blind with one finger and looked out into the whitening dusk. Your coachman is new to you, he said, without turning. Sir Eliot started. He was hired a fortnight since. How? The patience of the horse at the curb, the angle at which he holds the reins, and a certain want of respect, in the way he cracked his whip when you alighted. Continue, if you please. Who knew of the ring's inscription besides yourself and Lady Wainwright? No one. It is our private sentiment. Private sentiments have a curious way of becoming public knowledge, Holmes remarked. You mentioned a bitter scent, like singed pepper, if such a thing can be. I have caught it twice, always in my study. Holmes nodded as if to some inward tally. Watson, your hat. Sir Eliot, if your courage is in such working order as your reputation suggests, we shall accompany you to Grosvenor Place at once. There are certain trifles which I do not choose to leave to the imagination of valets and house doctors. Sir Eliot rose, relief and dread in equal measure upon his features. I shall be grateful to you all my life, Mr. Holmes, if you can make sense of this. Sense, Holmes returned, taking up his ulster and cane, is a commodity like any other, to be manufactured with the proper tools. Come. Within the hour we were rattling westward through streets that the weather had stamped with a haggard uniformity. Sir Eliot, opposite us, stared at his bandaged hand as if it might leap up and accuse him. Holmes, with his collar turned up and his chin sunk, regarded through half-closed eyes the passing iron railings, the shuttered shops, the phantoms of umbrellas bobbing in the glare of street lamps. Only once did he speak, and that was to ask with seeming irrelevance whether the Wainwright household had entertained any guests within the past month who hailed from the tropics. From the tropics? Sir Eliot repeated. Yes, two. Mr. Chander Roy, who represents a tea combine from Calcutta, and Captain Alistair Bruton, lately returned from the Niger Delta. But what can that possibly signify? Possibly nothing, said Holmes, and relapsed into his thoughtful silence. Grosvenor Place received us in that chilled hush which belongs to the houses of the very rich, wherein the carpets drink up sound, and the servants practice a sacerdotal discretion. Harridge, the valet, a clean-shaven fellow with pale lashes and a cat's-foot tread, conducted us first to the dressing-room with the air of one showing ruin to an insurance assessor. Upon the table lay the jewel dish, a shallow, chaste cup of silver. In it, side by side like twin planets, the heavy signet and the plain gold hoop. Holmes did not touch them. He bent until his hawk's nose hovered an inch above the ring and inhaled delicately, as a man might scent a wine. Then he straightened, and I thought, I could not swear to it, that a shade of disappointment crossed his features. No odour now, he said to me, very low. To Sir Eliot he added in his briskest tone, Watson will oblige us by examining the wound presently. First, your study. Harridge led us down a corridor lined with indifferent landscapes. The study, Sir Eliot's sanctum, was a masculine room, a great leather chair, a broad desk, a gun cabinet, a globe showing colonies in a blush of empire, and upon the mantel a small bronze Apollo with a broken lyre. The fire here had been allowed to die. Holmes knelt upon the hearthrug and held his long fingers 3 inches above the grate. He then rose, went to the desk, and with the merest glance at Sir Eliot tried the drawer. It was locked. "My papers, company papers," Sir Eliot murmured. "Nothing to the point, Mr. Holmes." "Everything is to the point," Holmes returned, not unkindly. "Pray, do you keep acids here?" "Acids? No, certainly not." Holmes's eye had gone to a dark ring upon the green leather of the writing surface, no bigger than a shilling, and to a corresponding dullness upon the brass of the desk lamp. He said nothing, but his cane described a thoughtful figure upon the carpet. He crossed to the window, touched the latch, and examined the sill with his lens. A very slight grit, no more than would powder a moth's wing, adhered to his fingertip. He sniffed it, then touched it to his tongue with an expression of austere resignation. "Watson," he said, "you may wish to wash your hands after you have done me the kindness of lifting the ring from the dish with these." From his pocket, he produced a folded piece of thin kid, an artist's glove, neatly split along the side. "Your touch, Sir Eliot, is evidently not to be trusted upon that particular object. Harridge, you will fetch me a glass of cold water, a candle, a sheet of black paper, and the thinnest needle in your mistress's workbox. No, do not stare. Do as I ask." The valet went, smooth as poured milk. Sir Eliot looked from the ring to Holmes. "You believe, then, that the thing can burn one man and not another?" "I believe," Holmes said, his eyes fixed upon the dead fire, "that the truth seldom troubles itself with our beliefs." He turned then, and his face had that eager, almost cruel brightness, which I had seen when some rare quarry came within scent. "We stand, I think, upon the threshold of a very neat little problem, with a heart in it that will not be to your taste, Sir Eliot, though the head of it may be to mine. Come, Watson, let us see what message the ring has left for those who are willing to read it, and with that, and with the candle, and the needle and the black paper yet to come, the first faint outline of the case began to burn in my mind as surely as the circle upon Sir Eliot. Wainwright's hand. Harridge returned with the requested articles balanced upon a tray, his pale lashes fluttering in mild protest at the oddity of the list. Holmes placed the candle upon the desk, set the sheet of black paper beside it, and poured the water into the glass with the air of a chemist arranging his retorts. He handed me the split kid glove and motioned toward the dressing-room with a jerk of his chin, which Harridge, well-trained creature, took as leave to vanish. "You will indulge me, Watson," he said, "by lifting the ring and placing it upon the black paper. Avoid, if you please, the inner surface." I did as he asked. The hoop lay like a dull planet in a night sky, its gold unostentatious, the inscription within no more than a pale thread. Holmes brought his lens to bear, then pricked the tiniest of points into a faint film that lay as a snail's trail might along the inner script. He touched the needle tip to his tongue, grimaced, and allowed himself the smallest nod. "Your bitter ghost again?" I murmured. "Something of that family." He dipped the needle into the water, shook a droplet free so that it hung trembling, and let it fall upon the interior of the ring. There was no flash, no theatrical smoke. Yet both of us heard, or fancied we heard, a susurration no louder than the breath of a moth, and in the candle's steady light the faintest vapour lifted, no colour at all, and was gone. Holmes touched the rim with the pad of his forefinger and withdrew it instantly. "Warm," he said. "Not dangerous, now that it has lain out of the body's heat for a night, but warm enough applied to a single moist finger to brand a neat ring. Our adversary, Watson, is practical as well as imaginative. Quicklime," I ventured, "a cousin, enough to do mischief, mixed with a pungent friend to advertise itself. Pray note the delicacy. The film sits only along the incised letters, where no casual polishing would dislodge it. A drop of oil or a rub with a cloth upon the plain hoop, and the trap would be sprung prematurely or not at all. One must admire the hand." Sir Eliot, who had watched with parted lips, mastered himself with an effort. "Then I was not mad," he said, and sank into the leather chair as if his bones had at last found a suit of clothes. "You are, on the contrary, inconveniently sane," Holmes returned. "Madmen are content with symbols. A sane man desires results." "Harridge!" The valet's head appeared with an alacrity that suggested he had not ventured far. "Sir? You replaced the ring in the dish last night." "Yes, sir." "You felt no heat?" "None, sir." "You did not wet your fingers in the course of your duties before handling it?" "No washing of glass, no decanting of water?" Harridge's pale lashes blinked. "I had been cleaning Sir Eliot's hairbrushes, sir." "With spirits?" "With a little cologne upon the cloth, sir." Holmes's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "Quite. That will do." As the door closed, he turned to our client. "You will be circumspect, Sir Eliot, as to whom you tell of this demonstration. There is no ghost in Grosvenor Place, only a mind and a hand. Both are more dangerous when alarmed." Sir Eliot's colour had returned, and with it a portion of his native resolution. "Mr. Holmes, I am in your debt, but I confess I do not comprehend. Who would wish to— No, I am a fool. In my position I have made enemies. But the intrusion into my study, the displaced objects, the scent—" Holmes had already stepped to the desk. He drew from his pocket a narrow steel rule, slipped it beneath the blotter and teased up a corner. A dust like powdered stone lay there, a mere breath of it, but enough to mark the green leather with a paler smear. He sniffed, wrinkled his nose, and tapped the brass lamp again with that curious resignation which in him stood in place of impatience. "You lock your desk at night?" "Always." "Always." "Who besides Harridge has the care of these rooms?" "Our housemaid, Ellen. My wife's maid, Jeanette, keeps to her rooms and the boudoir. The butler, Carstairs, does not come above this floor." "Useful boundaries," Holmes said. He stooped at the door and examined the keyhole with his lens, then the strike plate, finally the sill once more. And yet, dust stands on a surface where it has no right to be. Someone enters who carries their own dry weather in their pocket. "Come, Watson, we must pay our respects to Lady Wainwright." Sir Eliot led us through a suite of rooms whose appointments would have furnished a respectable exhibition. Chinese cabinets, a French clock that gossiped in silver whispers, a portrait of an ancestor who had purchased virtue by subscription. Lady Wainwright received us in a chamber that smelt of violet water and camphor. She was a woman of a fragile handsomeness, fair as a porcelain shepherdess and, at the moment of our bow, as brittle. Her hands, fine, nervous, twisted the ribbon of a scent bottle. "Mr. Holmes," she said, in a voice as carefully schooled as a diplomat's, "my husband believes we are beset by malice. I have tried to persuade him that we are beset only by chance. You will, I hope, prove me correct." "I shall endeavour to prove something," Holmes replied, and in that rained smile of his, I saw that he had already read her as one reads a telegram. "You have not been well, Lady Wainwright." "A trifling indisposition." "London in November," she said, and allowed her lashes to veil for an instant a glimmer too quick for sorrow. "Does one ever feel perfectly in London?" Holmes drifted, as was his habit, to the mantel. There, among porcelain shepherds of a more durable ilk, he paused at an ivory ring-stand, a dainty tree of branches upon which half a dozen feminine trifles hung. One branch was bare, and beneath it, upon the velvet tray, a faint thread of darker pile marked where some small circle had lately lain. "You have mislaid a ring," he said. "A trifle. I have a maid for such archaeology." The shot went wide. He had not meant to wound. She had not meant to reveal that she was capable of aiming. Sir Eliot made an impatient movement. "My dear," Holmes lifted his hand, "pray forgive me. My curiosity is a professional deformity. Your ladyship, in the last month, you have entertained Mr. Chander Roy and Captain Bruton. We have given dinners to half a dozen bores and 2 agreeable men," she returned, with a ghost of life in her tone. "Mr. Roy is the agreeable of commerce. Captain Bruton is the agreeable of the mess. Do you catalogue my guests as a naturalist his beetles, Mr. Holmes?" "When the beetles bite," he said mildly. "Did either gentleman spend time in Sir Eliot's study?" "My husband's study is his citadel. He will not allow even me to besiege it." "Why do you ask?" "Because a certain dust that belongs to the building trade has taken liberties with the leather there. Because a smell that is not of English hearths has lingered where it should not. Because a ring that should signify troth has lately signified pain." She stared at him very steadily. "You mean to frighten me?" "I mean," he said with a gentleness that astonished me, "to warn you. There is a hand in this house that moves when decent folk sleep. I should prefer that it did not move tonight." A silence fell in which the clock at the far end of the room made an absurd parade of its mechanism. Sir Eliot said, not without effort, "What would you have us do, Mr. Holmes?" "Nothing that you would not do in the ordinary course," Holmes replied briskly. "Dine as you intend. Lock what you lock. Sleep as you are accustomed to sleep. Harridge will, without attracting attention, retire with a megrims at 10. Carstairs will be detained below by an inventory of the silver. Ellen will have a cousin in Pimlico who has produced a baby of such interest that she cannot fail to go and see it. Janetta will have a letter from a friend, the contents of which will be unknown to her until morning. In short, we will make your citadel as lonely as its reputation." He turned to me, and there was that eager light again, the hawk that smelt warm blood upon cold air. "Watson, we shall return to Baker Street for certain implements and a coil of patience. At midnight, Sir Elliot, we will have the honour of borrowing your study." Lady Wainwright's fingers tightened upon the ribbon until it cut the flesh. "And if this hand moves—" "Then," Holmes said, and for once allowed himself a gleam of open pleasure, "we shall see to it that it cannot help but leave a fingerprint upon its own intention." The cab deposited us once more at Baker Street, where Holmes, with the brisk efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation, selected from his array of instruments a few items whose purpose I could only guess. A thin length of fishing line, a small vial of some colourless fluid, a folded square of black gauze, and a compact dark lantern were carefully packed into a leather case. He added to these a pair of delicate forceps and a small magnifying glass of stronger curvature than his usual lens. With these in hand, and his countenance alight with that peculiar intensity which always presaged the hunt, we returned through the mist to Grosvenor Place. By the time we arrived, the house had settled into its nightly rhythm. Carstairs, the butler, received us with his customary composure, though I observed in his eye the faintest flicker of surprise when Holmes instructed him in his smoothest tones to inventory the silver immediately. The man bowed, and we heard his measured tread retreat toward the dining-room. Ellen, the housemaid, had been dispatched on her errand, and Jeanette, the lady's maid, had retired to her quarters with the promised letter. Harridge alone remained pale and disapproving, until Holmes contrived, with a few words regarding a sudden indisposition, to relieve him of duty. Thus, by midnight, Sir Elliot's study was indeed the citadel Holmes had promised, a fortress held only by ourselves, with Sir Elliot pacing like a restless sentinel, his bandaged hand thrust behind his back. Holmes moved about the room as if it were his own laboratory, extinguishing the gas lamp and placing the dark lantern upon the desk so that a narrow beam fell across the green leather. He uncoiled his fishing line and stretched it taut across the sill of the window, fastening it so that even the faintest touch would stir the bell he had muffled with cloth. Then he dusted the writing surface with the gauze, bending close to examine what motes clung to it. Twice he touched his tongue to the gauze, frowning, and once he held it to the light, murmuring something I could not hear. Sir Elliot broke the silence at last. "Mr. Holmes, I feel as though I were conspiring against my own household. What if this intrusion proves to be nothing more than fancy?" Holmes straightened and gave him a look as sharp as the snap of a whip. "Then you will have lost nothing but a night's repose. But I do not think your burnt hand a fancy, Sir Elliot, nor the dust nor the scent. Trust me when I say the adversary we await is not imaginary. We sat thus in shadow, the minutes dragging like hours. The fire, replenished sparingly, gave off only a dull glow. Once or twice the sound of a carriage beyond the curtained windows stirred Sir Elliot to the point of speech, but Holmes silenced him with a finger to the lips. At 12:30, a floorboard creaked faintly in the corridor. At 1, the line across the sill quivered, and the muffled bell gave a sound no louder than a cough. Holmes was instantly upon his feet, the lantern in his hand, the light quenched but ready. Sir Elliot froze, his breath caught in his throat. The handle turned very slowly with the patience of one well accustomed to locks. The door opened a finger's breadth, then wider. Into the room slipped a figure as silent as a cat, clad in dark clothes that glimmered faintly where the lantern's chink betrayed them. The intruder moved at once to the desk, a small phial produced from his pocket, and with practised speed he tipped a minute quantity of some powder into the shallow dish where the rings had lain. His head bent close. His hand reached for the lamp. The beam of Holmes's lantern shot out like a blade. "Hold, sir," he cried. "The game is done." The figure started as though struck, dropping the phial, which rattled across the leather. In the same instant, Holmes sprang forward. his long arms pinioning the man with a dexterity that bespoke weeks of boxing practice at Bartitsu. Sir Elliot uttered a stifled exclamation, and I rushed to lend my aid only to find it unnecessary. Holmes had his captive fast by the wrists, and had swept him into the light where the pale, astonished features of Harridge, the valet, were revealed. The very model of discretion, Holmes remarked coldly, until discretion was no longer possible. Watson, oblige me by securing the lamp before our friend contrives a more spectacular finale. Harridge struggled, but without conviction. His pale lashes fluttered, his mouth working. I meant no harm, sir, only to frighten with a burn that might have cost a finger, if not more. Holmes snapped. Your choice of powders was ingenious. A touch of calcium with a volatile alkali, I think, hidden in the lettering where no cloth would disturb it. Very pretty, until it betrayed you. Sir Elliot's face had hardened, his ruddy colour deepening to a dangerous hue. Harridge! You, who have been in my service these 5 years, what devil prompted this treachery? The valet hung his head, muttering something about debts, about a gentleman who had promised relief. Holmes's eyes glittered. Ah, yes, the hand behind the hand. We have caught the tool, Watson, but not the craftsman. Harridge, you will sit. Sir Elliot, I recommend that you restrain your indignation until we have learnt whom our pale friend serves. Even as he spoke, Holmes bent to examine the dropped file. With infinite care, he scooped a few grains of its residue onto the black paper, then held it to the lantern. The tiny motes shimmered with a faint crystalline sparkle. He touched a grain to his tongue, grimaced, and nodded. As I thought. Imported and not cheaply. Such delicacies do not find their way into a valet's pocket without assistance. Sir Elliot sank heavily into the chair, staring at the man he had trusted. You will tell us who paid you, he said hoarsely. Harridge's lips twisted. I daren't. Better your anger than his. Holmes's hand tightened on his shoulder. We shall see. Watson, keep your revolver to hand. I suspect the night's entertainment is not yet over. Harridge sat rigid in the chair to which Holmes had propelled him, his pale eyes darting from one to the other of us, like a cornered animal calculating the distance to every exit. The glow from the dark lantern caught the tremor at his jaw, though his lips pressed shut in that mulish defiance which so often betrays the hired hand, too terrified of his master to confess. Holmes regarded him without anger, only that cold detachment which reduced even the most obstinate soul to an insect beneath the lens. You speak of fear, Harridge, he said quietly, and indeed you have cause. A valet's wage may be stretched by gaming debts, but the man who purchased your treachery will not forgive the failure of his design. In such men, gratitude for service rendered is outweighed by dread of exposure. When you stand between discovery and his safety, he will cut the cord as neatly as you cut your master's trust. The only protection you may find is here, under Sir Elliot's roof and under the law's shelter. Choose swiftly. The valet swallowed. I could see the pulse hammering in his throat, his hands working against the arms of the chair as though the wood might splinter. Sir Elliot leaned forward, his voice taut with controlled fury. You will answer, Mr. Holmes. I demand it. The man's resolve wavered at last. His words tumbled in a rush, half whisper, half confession. It was Captain Bruton, sir. He came to me 3 weeks past. Said he knew I had little ready money, that my fondness for the clubs left me vulnerable. He offered gold for small favours, to move a chair, to leave a drawer unlatched, to note the comings and goings of visitors. I thought it mere curiosity at first. Then he pressed for more. He brought a packet, powder it was, and bade me sprinkle it on the ring when next Sir Elliot set it aside. He swore it would only make a mark, a warning, not true injury. I did as he said, but his eyes shifted fearfully to the bandaged hand. I swear I never meant worse than a fright. Holmes's brows arched the barest degree. You swear much, Harridge, but truth is less in your words than in your omissions. Captain Bruton sought not to amuse himself with parlour tricks. He has an object, and you are the instrument. What else were you charged to do? The man hesitated, then muttered, to admit him by the garden door tomorrow night. He said he must examine certain papers in the study, company papers. He swore it would not be theft, only borrowing. Sir Elliot's fists clenched upon the arms of his chair until the knuckles shone. By heaven, if I had strength in this hand, I would strike the fellow down. His voice shook with fury. My company papers are investments. What devil's scheme is this? Holmes silenced him with a raised hand. The devil's scheme will be clearer by daylight, though daylight will not help us catch our devil. Harridge, you have done wisely to speak, though too late to absolve yourself. Watson, note that Bruton sought the study alone, never the drawing-room, never the boudoir. His quarry lies in Sir Eliot's desk, not his wife's jewel box. Very good. He paced the carpet, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his head bowed as if listening to an inaudible tune. A colonial officer, lately returned from the Niger Delta. He dines in fashionable houses, tells tales of the tropics, and all the while sets his snare for the director of a company whose affairs touch upon the very regions from which he has returned. Add to this the dust upon the leather, which was no common powder but laterite, a soil peculiar to those climates. Our captain has not shaken the red earth from his boots as thoroughly as he imagines. Yes, Watson, the outline sharpens. Sir Eliot regarded him in bewilderment. But why the ring? Why burn me like some medieval malefactor? Because, Sir Eliot, a direct theft would raise immediate alarm, while a slow corrosion of trust might prepare the field. To plant in your mind the notion of mischief, to make you suspect your household, to unbalance your confidence, that serves his purpose. When the company papers vanish, you will attribute it to the same unseen malice. By the time you suspect the captain, he will be half the world away with knowledge enough to ruin your fortunes. Harridge stirred, his voice trembling. He promised me passage, sir, if all went well. Said he'd take me to the Cape, where a man might start afresh. Holmes's lip curled. A fresh grave, more likely. He turned to Sir Eliot. We must not alarm Lady Wainwright with details, but she must know the danger passes nearer her household than superstition. For tonight, Harridge remains in your custody. Lock him where he cannot signal his master. Tomorrow Captain Bruton will walk straight into the snare he has himself prepared. Sir Eliot rose, his height and bearing regaining their natural authority. He rang for Carstairs, and when the butler appeared, explained in curt tones that Harridge had committed a grave offence and must be secured in the wine cellar until the police were summoned. The butler, though his eyes widened, bowed and obeyed, leading the pale valet away. The study fell silent once more. Holmes adjusted the lantern wick, then seated himself in the great chair as though it were a throne. Watson, make note. The adversary is subtle, but he has miscalculated. He believes Harridge his creature still. When tomorrow night he presents himself at the garden door expecting admission, he will find instead the muzzle of my revolver, or yours. Between now and then, we must learn precisely which of Sir Eliot's papers so excite his cupidity, for it is not every company memorandum that drives a man to treachery and chemical tricks. Somewhere in your files, Sir Eliot, lies the very nerve of this enterprise. Show me your locked drawer. Sir Eliot unlocked the heavy oak desk with a key that trembled in his injured hand. He withdrew a sheaf of documents bound in red tape. These are minutes of the Colonial Board. Contracts, maps, shares. Nothing more. Holmes took them, leafing through with practiced eye. Twice he paused, once to examine a map whose coastlines were tinted in vermilion, again to study a ledger of investments. He laid both aside, tapping the map with a forefinger. Here lies your answer. A concession, timber rights in the Niger Delta, granted to your company by treaty not yet made public. To a man like Bruton, lately returned from those waters, this knowledge is gold. He need only convey it to rivals or speculators, and fortunes will change hands before you so much as announce it to Parliament. Sir Eliot's face drained of colour. Then the company's future, my own honour, hang upon keeping this paper from his grasp. Precisely, Holmes said, and so we shall. Watson, I believe tomorrow evening promises us a most instructive encounter. Holmes spread the map flat upon the desk and weighted its corners with the silver inkstand and the heavy signet ring. The vermilion-stained delta lay between us like some exotic puzzle, its rivers branching and curling with the intricacy of veins in a living body. Holmes traced one line with his forefinger, pausing where a faint annotation in red ink marked a concession area. You see here, Watson, he said, his voice low, this parcel of land abuts the routes by which timber and palm oil are ferried to the coast. Possession of such knowledge before it becomes common would enable a man to secure contracts, manipulate prices, and ruin rivals. Captain Bruton, fresh from these very regions, knows its worth intimately. What Harridge lacked in intelligence, his master supplied in avarice. Sir Eliot leaned heavily upon the desk, his injured hand trembling against the edge. Then the concession must be guarded with my life. If it were whispered abroad even among my fellow directors, The damage would be irreparable. Bruton would enrich himself tenfold while our company staggered. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of one who sees the form of the quarry at last. Quite so. The matter has ceased to be merely personal mischief. It is commercial espionage cloaked in colonial romance. Fortunately, Bruton has entrusted himself to methods more theatrical than sound. That will prove his undoing. We replaced the papers in the drawer, locked it, and Holmes slipped the key into his own pocket with Sir Eliot's nod of consent. Then, as though a veil had dropped upon his mood, Holmes relaxed into the great chair, steepling his fingers. Now we must contrive a reception worthy of our guest. The simplest snare is best. One light burning, a drawer invitingly ajar, a household asleep. He will come by the garden door. We shall await him here. Sir Eliot's nerves, though stiffened by indignation, were visibly frayed. And if he comes armed, Mr. Holmes? Then, Sir Eliot, he will meet with an equal courtesy. Watson has his revolver. I have mine. Fear not, we seek evidence, not blood. The night that followed was long and uneasy. Sir Eliot insisted on remaining with us in the study, though Holmes advised him to retire, lest his agitation betray the ruse. We kept the fire low and the lamp shaded, so that the room bore the air of an abandoned citadel, the desk standing out like bait in a trap. Holmes sat silent, his keen eyes fixed upon the curtained window. I confess my own nerves grew taut as the hours dragged. The faint tick of the French clock on the mantel seemed like the march of an army across my senses. At last, when the city beyond had sunk to its deepest hush, Holmes's hand lifted sharply. From the garden came the faintest scrape, as of a shoe upon gravel. Then a pause, a cautious rustle at the door and the creak of hinges smothered by a gloved hand. A draught stirred the curtains as the figure of Captain Bruton slipped inside. He was a man of vigorous build, broad-shouldered, his moustache bristling like a sabre, his face bronzed by foreign suns. He moved with the assurance of one who trusts in his own boldness, going straight to the desk without so much as a glance about the room. In his hand gleamed a small lamp with a shutter, by which he cast a faint beam upon the drawer. He produced a slender file of steel, set to work upon the lock, and within moments the drawer yielded. He drew forth the bundle of papers, his breath quickening audibly in the stillness. It was then that Holmes struck the lantern full upon him. That will do, Captain Bruton. The man wheeled, his face flushed with sudden fury, his hand flying to his coat. Before I could level my revolver, Holmes had crossed the space between them with a spring that belied his languid figure. He seized Bruton's wrist with iron precision, forcing the revolver that had half emerged from the man's pocket to the floor. The weapon clattered across the carpet, and I was upon it in an instant, covering our intruder with the steadiness drilled into me on Afghan nights. Bruton glared, his teeth clenched. "Damn you, Holmes, what right—" "The right," Holmes cut in coolly, "that society grants to those who protect it from knaves who would imperil its fortunes. You sought Sir Eliot's trust through poison and trickery. You sought his ruin through theft. You may now explain yourself before the law." Sir Eliot rose, his face pale yet set with iron resolution. "You villain! To creep into my house, to burn my flesh with some devil's powder, to corrupt my servant, all for greed." Bruton laughed harshly. "Greed, call it enterprise. You sit in your clubs and grow fat on dividends wrung from Africa, while men like me rot in fever swamps. I've seen fortunes carved with rifles and quinine. Why should you hold all the keys? One scrap of paper, one concession, and I might have had my share." Holmes regarded him with a cold detachment. "Your grievance may serve as rhetoric at your trial, Captain. It will not erase the mark upon Sir Eliot's hand, nor the powder upon your own boots. The red earth clings closer than loyalty." He drew from his pocket the gauze, now faintly stained, and held it before Bruton's eyes. "This, with the dust from your luggage, will suffice to prove your hand. You were careless, Captain. You might have bribed Harridge to sweep your traces more thoroughly. Instead, you left your tropics upon his master's desk." Bruton made a sudden lunge, but Sir Eliot himself, enraged beyond caution, thrust him back with his uninjured arm. Holmes pressed the man firmly into the chair, binding his wrists with the fishing line that had served earlier for the window snare. Bruton struggled, but the cord held fast. Holmes straightened, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "Watson, summon the constable. I believe Scotland Yard will be grateful for this delivery. Sir Eliot, your household is free of its traitors. The great baronet sank heavily into his chair, his breath ragged with relief. Lady Wainwright, roused by the commotion, appeared at the door, her eyes wide with terror, until she beheld Bruton bound. Then, with a composure born of pride, she laid her hand gently upon her husband's shoulder. Holmes, seeing the moment was theirs, turned away, his gaze already drifting inward to the chain of logic that had brought us here. I recognized the familiar silence that follows a hunt concluded, the stillness before the explanation yet to be given. And so we waited in that study at Grosvenor Place, the bound captain glowering, Sir Eliot and his lady clinging to composure, and Holmes, the hawk who had stooped upon his prey, already turning his mind to the next flight. Inspector Lestrade arrived within the hour, rubbing his hands against the cold as he stepped into the study with 2 constables at his back. His small eyes took in the scene, the bound figure of Captain Bruton, the bundle of papers upon the desk, Sir Eliot with his injured hand, and Holmes standing aloof with arms folded. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade, with that blend of irritation and reluctant admiration I had come to know, "you've contrived another midnight drama. What's the charge this time?" "Attempted theft," Holmes replied crisply. "Conspiracy to defraud the Phoebus Colonial Company. Aggravated assault upon Sir Eliot Wainwright. And if the Yard has appetite for detail, tampering with chemical agents to inflict injury." Lestrade raised his brows. "And this is your culprit? Captain Alistair Bruton? A respectable name, I'd have said." "A name with less respectability than gloss," Holmes returned. "The proof lies in the dust upon his boots, the powder upon his fingers, the confession of Harridge and the very act of trespass you interrupted. Bind him securely, Lestrade. He has teeth enough to bite, though his claws are clipped." The constables seized Bruton, who struggled with oaths that echoed against the carved panels of the study. Lady Wainwright flinched at his coarse fury, but Sir Eliot only tightened his arm about her shoulder. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Eliot said, with heavy gravity, "you have preserved not only my reputation, but the very stability of our company. I cannot say what debt I owe." Holmes inclined his head with the faintest smile. "The debt, Sir Eliot, is not mine to calculate. Your enemies, I think, will do that for you." Lestrade, eager for particulars, pressed Holmes with questions. "What's this talk of powder and burning?" "You'll need to make it plain to the magistrate." Holmes motioned toward the jewel dish. "A film of caustic compound, cunningly laid within the inscription of a wedding ring. It burned Sir Eliot upon contact, while others, handling it with dry fingers or cologne-damp cloth, felt nothing. A devilishly neat trick, ingenious enough to convince a man of haunting. Its purpose was not mere cruelty, but to unbalance Sir Eliot's reason, to prepare him for the notion of unseen malice within his house. Meanwhile, Harridge, the valet, and Bruton's tool was to admit the captain, who would then rifle the company's papers. The burned hand was a prologue, Inspector. The theft was the intended drama." Lestrade scratched his chin, evidently impressed though loath to confess it. "And you discovered all this in a single evening?" "In an hour," Holmes said curtly. "It required only that one look at the dust upon the leather, one sniff of the bitter vapour in the study, and the confession was inevitable." Bruton was careless. He carried the Niger Delta into Grosvenor Place upon his boots, and I have but to show the soil under his nails, to place him at the scene of his own guilt. Bruton spat an oath. "A trickster's reasoning. You've always despised men who fight for a living, Holmes. You sit in your chamber and weave theories, while the rest of us wade through fever and blood." Holmes's eyes sharpened, and for a moment his voice held a chill that silenced the room. "I despise no man, Captain, save he who would wreck others to repair his own fortune. You saw a chance to seize by theft what you could not win by valor. That makes you not soldier, but criminal. Take him, Lestrade." The constables hauled Bruton to his feet, binding him more securely, and led him from the room. The heavy door closed behind them, leaving a hush that was almost a relief. Lady Wainwright let out the breath she had been holding and sank into the chair by the fire. "Is it ended, Mr. Holmes? May we sleep at last without fear?" Holmes turned toward her with uncharacteristic gentleness. "You may, madam. The greater danger is past, but beware of secrecy among men whose fortunes depend upon it. The company's papers must be guarded as jealously as crown jewels. You have enemies enough without inviting them to your hearth." Sir Eliot clasped Holmes's hand with fervour. "Your warning is just—" "I shall see to it." "You have my gratitude, and that of every honest man whose livelihood depends upon Phoebus. Holmes inclined his head, already withdrawing into that quiet abstraction which so often seized him at the end of a case. I recognized the signs and guided Sir Eliot into silence, lest he mistake Holmes's indifference for discourtesy. When at last we took our leave, the snow was falling in thick flakes, muffling the city into ghostly quiet. The cab bore us back to Baker Street, through white-clad streets, and Holmes, wrapped in his ulster, sat in brooding silence. I ventured at last, "You have the air of a man who has won yet is unsatisfied." He stirred, drawing his scarf tighter. "There was a detail, Watson, a small detail that troubles me." "The ring." "The ring? Yes, why choose a wedding band as the instrument of injury? Any trinket might have served, yet Bruton selected that token of troth between husband and wife. It is an insult beyond the necessary, and insults are not in his style. He is a soldier turned adventurer, direct, blunt, unscrupulous, but theatrical. Know the hand behind the hand, Watson. The true intellect remains unseen." I frowned. "Do you mean Harridge was not merely his creature? That there is another?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the cab. "Exactly. Harridge confessed too readily, as though repeating a script. And Bruton, though guilty, played a part too broad. I cannot shake the sense that both were pieces upon a larger board. Who placed the ring in play? Who whispered in Lady Wainwright's ear of mischievous spirits, even as her husband burned? These questions remain unanswered. I felt a chill not from the snow, but from his words. Then the case is not ended." "Ended?" Holmes's smile was thin and sardonic. "No, Watson. It has only shifted its ground. Bruton will hang. Harridge will rot. But the mind that conceived the game has yet to show its face. Mark my words, the ring that burned the hand will leave a deeper scar than Sir Eliot imagines. We have not heard the last of this affair." The cab drew up at Baker Street, its wheels crunching upon the frozen ruts. As we ascended the familiar steps, I glanced at Holmes. His eyes were alight once more, not with satisfaction but with anticipation, as though the chase had widened rather than ceased. And I knew, with the certainty born of long years at his side, that the true adversary of this curious business had yet to be revealed. Holmes passed the following day in one of those profound silences which I had come to dread almost as much as the storms of his nervous energy. He sat by the window with his long fingers steepled, the unopened morning papers upon the floor beside him, his gaze fixed not upon the snow-whitened street, but upon some point far beyond it. Twice I ventured a question, and twice I was silenced with a curt shake of the head. It was not until dusk had fallen, and Mrs. Hudson had placed the lamps upon the table, that he stirred at last. "You saw, Watson," he said abruptly, "how Bruton spoke of greed, of fortune, of the swamps of Africa. A blunt man with blunt motives. Yet the artifice of the ring, the symbolism of that particular object, was subtle, elegant, and cruel. Such contrivance belongs to a mind more intimate, more psychological. It is not Bruton's handwriting I see upon this case." "You think another guided him?" I asked. Holmes inclined his head. "Precisely. A hand that delights in irony, that seeks not merely to injure but to unnerve. Harridge was bribed, Bruton was tempted, but the conception, that was born elsewhere. I have considered who within the Wainwright circle might profit from Sir Eliot's ruin. His fellow directors? Possible but distant. His servants? Too limited. His wife?" Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing. "She alone stood beside the fire when Sir Eliot's trust was shaken. She spoke of spirits, of mischief, of invisible malice." "That language is telling," I started. "Surely, Holmes, you do not suspect Lady Wainwright?" "She seemed the very image of loyalty." "Seemed, Watson. Mark the word. I have observed many a face painted with fidelity, while treachery dried beneath. Her composure last night, when Bruton was unmasked, was that of a woman who sees one mask fall while her own remains intact. There was no shock, no collapse, only a tightening of the hand upon her husband's shoulder. That gesture, Watson, was not comfort but calculation. I could not wholly credit it, yet I knew Holmes's instinct to be seldom at fault. But what motive could she have? Holmes rose, pacing the room with quick strides. "That we must learn. A woman in her position, bound by wealth yet perhaps estranged in affection, may see in her husband's ruin a path to freedom or to another alliance. Consider the peculiar cruelty of choosing the wedding band as instrument. What more intimate blow could she strike than to make the token of fidelity itself the means of injury? The idea chilled me, yet as I recalled her pale, composed face, her ready acceptance of Holmes's intrusion into her private chamber, I felt a creeping doubt that I had dismissed too quickly. Holmes seized his coat. "Come, Watson. We must return to Grosvenor Place before the yard grows complacent. Bruton is caged, but the spider may yet sit undisturbed at the heart of her web." We found Sir Eliot alone in his library, his injured hand resting heavily upon the arm of his chair. He greeted us with evident relief, though weariness clouded his eyes. "Mr. Holmes, I am grateful beyond words. With Bruton in custody, I had hoped this nightmare ended." Holmes's glance flickered. "And yet, Sir Eliot, it is not ended. May I speak plainly?" "By all means." "Then I must tell you that I do not believe Captain Bruton the sole author of your misfortunes. He was an instrument." "The design is larger." Sir Eliot frowned, confusion giving way to dawning alarm. "You mean there is another?" "Exactly. And that other is close at hand." Holmes's voice was grave, his eyes fixed upon the baronet. "Did Lady Wainwright ever express dissatisfaction with your company dealings?" Sir Eliot's expression hardened. "My wife has never meddled in business, but she is aware of your concessions in Africa." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "She has heard me speak of them. I have not hidden my affairs from her." "Just so. And was she present when you first discovered the ring burned you?" "No, she had retired." Holmes leaned closer. "Yet it was she who suggested spirits were at work, was it not?" Sir Eliot blinked in astonishment. "Yes, but what of it? Women are fanciful. She sought only to comfort me." Holmes said nothing, only turned away with that peculiar look of absorption that marked the arrival of conviction. At that moment, the door opened and Lady Wainwright entered, her figure slender against the heavy draperies, her eyes luminous in the lamplight. She paused, regarding Holmes with an unreadable expression. "You return, Mr. Holmes," she said softly. "Has Captain Bruton not confessed enough to satisfy you?" Holmes bowed slightly. "Confession is seldom the whole truth, madam. There is always the question of who composed the words he spoke." Her lips curved, though whether in amusement or disdain I could not tell. "And you imagine perhaps that I held the pen?" "I imagine," Holmes replied evenly, "that no man in this affair chose the wedding ring but you. It was too delicate, too cruel, too intimate a stroke for Bruton's heavy hand. The notion of unseen spirits, again, too subtle for him. If I err, madam, correct me. But I think you are not so innocent as you would have your husband believe." "Your husband believe?" Sir Eliot half rose from his chair, staring at her in disbelief. "Margaret, this is monstrous." "Holmes, you cannot—" But she only smiled faintly, her composure unbroken. "You are clever, Mr. Holmes, yet cleverness can stumble when it mistakes imagination for proof. What evidence have you beyond conjecture?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "Evidence enough, madam. The ivory ring stand in your chamber bore the indentation of a band removed recently. Where is that ring now? It was not among your jewels. And who but you could have supplied the inscription of Sir Eliot's band to Bruton? Such knowledge was private, shared between husband and wife. Bruton knew the chemistry, perhaps. Harridge supplied the hand. But you, Lady Wainwright, you alone supplied the symbol." A silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Sir Eliot's face was ashen, his injured hand trembling upon the arm of the chair. His wife's gaze did not falter. "You spin a fine tale, Mr. Holmes," she said at last, her voice calm. "But tales are not evidence. Without proof, the law will laugh at you. And without the law, what power have you over me?" Holmes's answer was cold and quiet. "The power of truth, madam, and truth once spoken has a way of burning deeper than any ring." Sir Eliot rose now, his voice breaking. "Margaret, tell me it is false." She did not reply. Her silence was more eloquent than any denial. And as the clock struck the hour, I felt the full weight of Holmes's deduction settle upon the room, binding us all in its inexorable hold. Sir Eliot stood trembling, torn between fury and disbelief, his broad figure casting a wavering shadow across the hearth. Lady Wainwright, by contrast, remained perfectly still, her composure so absolute that it seemed more dangerous than any violent outburst. Her silence was eloquent, and in that silence her husband found no comfort. "Margaret," he whispered hoarsely, "you cannot— surely you could not have allied yourself with this villain Bruton? Speak, woman. Deny it, for heaven's sake." Her lips parted, but the faint smile that touched them was more of a challenge than an answer. "And if I do not?" she said softly. "If I tell you that your Mr. Holmes has indeed guessed rightly, that I lent Bruton what he required, not from love of him but from hatred of the fetters you placed upon me, what then, Elliot?" "What then?" The baronet recoiled as though struck, his bandaged hand clutching at his chest. "Good God," he cried. "My own wife!" Holmes's voice cut through the air, cool and incisive. "Control yourself, Sir Elliot. Passion will serve no purpose here. The lady has revealed more in her defiance than she would in denial. We must sift what is true from what is designed to wound." Lady Wainwright turned her gaze upon him. "Ever the logician, Mr. Holmes. But what is logic to the heart? Do you know what it is to be bound in a marriage that has long ceased to live, to stand in rooms filled with gold, and yet feel poorer than the beggar at the gate? Elliot is a man of figures, of ledgers, of contracts. His world leaves no room for me. If I sought to remind him of my existence by a little trick with his ring, well, he cannot say I failed to gain his attention." Her voice, calm though it was, carried a bitterness that made Sir Elliot groan aloud. He sank heavily into his chair, covering his face with his uninjured hand. "This is monstrous," he muttered. "Monstrous beyond belief." Holmes regarded her intently. "And yet," he said, "there is a gap in your account, Lady Wainwright. You confessed to mischief, perhaps even malice. But it was Bruton who sought the company's secrets. Did you knowingly aid him in that? Or were you but a pawn in his larger scheme?" She laughed, low, musical, but edged with scorn. "I am no man's pawn, Mr. Holmes. Bruton fancied himself the master of the game, but he was only the arm. I was the mind. It was I who placed Harridge in his path. I who suggested the ring, I who fed Bruton the morsel of the inscription. He thought he used me. In truth, I used him. And had you not meddled, the Phoebus Company would even now be in ruins. Elliot disgraced, and I—" She broke off, her eyes glittering with something that was not triumph but desperation. Holmes's expression did not change, though his eyes grew colder. "And you, madam, what would you have gained?" "Freedom!" she cried suddenly, the mask slipping at last. "Freedom from this mausoleum of duty, from the endless procession of ledgers and meetings. Do you not see? With Elliot disgraced, I might have been free to shape my own destiny, to live rather than merely endure." Sir Elliot groaned again, but Holmes held up a hand to forestall him. "Your reasoning, Lady Wainwright, is as flawed as it is cruel. You speak of freedom, yet you would have achieved nothing but ruin, for him, for yourself, for all who depended upon the company. Your scheme was built not upon liberty, but upon destruction." She drew herself up, pale but defiant. "Better destruction than suffocation." Holmes turned to Sir Elliot, who still sat bowed beneath the weight of revelation. "You see now, sir, the true heart of the matter. Captain Bruton was the thief, Harridge the tool, but the conception, the choosing of the weapon that burned not only your hand but your peace, came from within your own walls. It is the oldest truth I know. The deadliest wounds are struck not by enemies without, but by those closest within." Sir Elliot lifted his face, ravaged by shock, and whispered, "Holmes." "What am I to do?" "That is for you, not me, to decide," Holmes said gravely. "The law can touch Bruton and Harridge, but the law does not reach to the bitterness of a wife's heart. If you expose her, you destroy yourself along with her. If you conceal her part, you condemn yourself to silence. It is a dilemma only you can resolve." For the first time, Lady Wainwright faltered. Her eyes flicked to her husband, and for a moment I thought I saw something human, fear perhaps or regret, pierce her composure. Then her chin lifted once more, proud and unyielding. Holmes bowed slightly. "I have said my piece. Watson, we shall leave them to their reckoning." But Sir Elliot's hand shot out, seizing Holmes's sleeve. "No, wait. Do not leave me thus. Tell me what you in my place would do." Holmes's gaze softened, though his voice remained stern. "I am not in your place, Sir Elliot, but if I were, I should remember that to expose her is to wound yourself. Sometimes the wisest course is silence, though it costs dear. Yet be assured of this, she has lost her power. Deception thrives in shadows. In the light of truth it withers." Lady Wainwright's lips parted as though to retort, but no words came. She sank into a chair opposite her husband, her eyes fixed upon the fire. The silence between them was more terrible than any quarrel. Holmes touched my arm. "Come, Watson." And with that we withdrew, leaving husband and wife facing one another across the gulf, that no detective, however brilliant, could bridge. As we rode back through the muffled streets, the snow falling steadily upon the city, I turned to Holmes. "Do you think he will forgive her?" Holmes's profile was sharp against the lamplight, his eyes unreadable. "Forgive? Perhaps forget? Never. The ring that burned the hand, Watson, has left a scar far deeper than the skin. It will not soon fade." He leaned back in the cab, closing his eyes, and I knew that for him the case was finished. Yet for Sir Eliot and his wife it had only just begun. The days that followed were of a kind that tested my patience. Holmes, having delivered his conclusions in Grosvenor Place, relapsed into his customary indifference, as though the matter no longer merited his thoughts. He busied himself with monographs on tobacco ash, spent a morning experimenting upon the chemical properties of belladonna, and passed the evenings stretched languidly upon the settee with his violin. Yet I knew him too well to be deceived by such languor. His eyes, when they lifted from the strings, had a brightness that betrayed some inner fire still smouldering. The newspapers carried abundant accounts of Captain Bruton's arrest. "A daring attempt at company secrets foiled," proclaimed one journal, while another cast the affair in the lurid colours of "an African adventurer's revenge." The name of Sherlock Holmes was barely mentioned, save in a grudging line in the Gazette. Bruton, it seemed, would face trial on charges of attempted theft and assault. Herridge's confession had sealed his fate, and the man's own silence did nothing to ease his defence. Scotland Yard congratulated itself loudly. Lestrade, in a brief note to Holmes, even ventured to suggest that the matter had been an excellent example of cooperation between the Yard and outside assistance. I laid the note aside with some irritation. "You have been robbed of credit once again, Holmes. Does it not gall you?" Holmes plucked idly at the violin. "The applause of the public, Watson, is a fleeting intoxication. What I seek is knowledge, and knowledge I have. Bruton will hang or be transported, but the true interest lies in the mind that shaped his steps. That mind remains at liberty." "You still mean Lady Wainwright?" I asked. Holmes's bow hovered in the air, then fell to his knee. "I mean precisely her. Consider her silence when confronted. A guilty party will protest, dissemble, collapse, anything but maintain that steady defiance. She is a woman of remarkable self-command. If she confesses nothing, it is because she calculates that her husband's pride will keep him mute. She has played her part with consummate skill. I could not but feel a pang of pity for Sir Eliot. And what of him? Do you believe he will denounce her?" "No," Holmes said quietly. "He will lock the truth within his breast, as men of his class so often do. The scandal would ruin his name more surely than Bruton's theft. He will suffer in silence, and she will continue her existence in that great house, untouchable by the law, but bound forever by his knowledge of her treachery. That, I think, is punishment enough." It was on the third evening after these words that Sir Eliot himself appeared at Baker Street. He looked a broken man. His step, once firm, was heavy. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. His injured hand remained swathed in bandages. Holmes received him without surprise, motioning him to the chair by the fire. "I could not keep away," Sir Eliot said in a low voice. "Since that night there has been no peace beneath my roof. My wife speaks little, but her silence is heavier than reproach. I find myself doubting every glance, every word, as though each conceals some fresh deceit. Tell me, Mr. Holmes, am I to endure this torment without hope of relief?" Holmes regarded him gravely. "Relief, Sir Eliot, lies not in my art but in your own strength. I cannot mend the rift that truth has opened. You must decide whether to forgive or to sever. But I will say this, the lady, for all her fault, is no fool. She will not repeat her error. Fear may restrain where affection failed." Sir Eliot bowed his head. "Fear is a poor bond for marriage. Yet sometimes," Holmes murmured, "it is the only bond left." The baronet rose, and I saw that no comfort had reached him. He pressed Holmes's hand in mute gratitude and departed, leaving behind him an air of tragedy that lingered long after the sound of his carriage had faded. I turned to Holmes, moved by indignation. "Surely, Holmes, it is unjust. Bruton faces trial, Harridge is disgraced, but the true architect of the crime walks free." Holmes shook his head. "Not free, Watson. No woman who has betrayed so intimately is free. She is bound to her husband's knowledge, chained by his silence more tightly than any cell. Public justice may fail, but private retribution is often swifter and more inexorable. Believe me, Lady Wainwright will find her triumph turned to ashes." His words proved prophetic. A fortnight later, a short notice appeared in the Morning Chronicle. Lady Wainwright, it was reported, had departed suddenly for the continent, citing ill health and the need for a warmer climate. Sir Eliot remained in London, his name still upon the company's rolls, but his presence at society functions ceased. Rumour, ever merciless, whispered of a separation discreetly arranged. No scandal was made public, yet those who knew the couple remarked upon the pall that had fallen over their house. When I showed the report to Holmes, he merely inclined his head. "The matter has resolved itself, as such matters do. The scar upon Sir Eliot's hand will heal in time. The scar upon his heart will not. And Lady Wainwright, I think, will learn that exile is a harsher prison than Newgate." He turned then to his violin, drawing from it a sombre melody that filled the room with shadows. I sat silently, reflecting upon the strange cruelty of fate, that the keenest suffering had not been dealt by the grasping adventurer nor the venal valet, but by the hand of the woman closest to the victim. The case, though solved, left no triumph in its wake, only a lingering sadness. At length Holmes laid aside his bow. "Watson," he said, his voice softer than I had heard it in days, "you ask why I pursue these problems when so often the truth brings only misery. It is because misery concealed is worse than misery revealed. Sir Eliot now sees clearly, and though the sight may burn, it is better than blindness. That at least is a service we can render." I could not answer. The snow still lay thick upon the city, muffling the cries of the street, and within our chambers the fire burned low. The case of the ring that burned the hand had closed, but in its embers glowed a truth as bitter as any Holmes had uncovered, that the sharpest betrayals are those which strike from within, and that justice, when it comes, may wear not the face of law but of life itself. It was some weeks later, on an evening when London lay washed clean by a thawing rain, and the lamps wore yellow halos upon the wet streets, that Holmes chose to speak of the matter with the fullness I had long expected. He was in that companionable mood which comes to him when the pursuit is over and the bow has been returned to its case, and I had the good sense to ask nothing, but merely to push the spirit Tantalus within reach, and to settle myself where the fire's glow might coax his recollection. "You have been patient, Watson," he said at last, his lean face softened by the play of light. "It is time you had your chronology. You saw the symptoms. Permit me to prescribe the cause. I own," said I, "that certain transitions in the affair were not clear to me. For example, the dust upon the leather. You named it at a glance, yet to me it was no more than dust." "Because you are modest and I am vain," he answered with a flash of teeth. "In truth, it was little more than inference assisted by memory. Laterite, an iron-rich soil, bakes into a fine brick-red powder under tropical suns. I have a specimen in the cabinet gathered from a missionary's trunk years ago. The grit on Sir Eliot's sill and the smear upon his desk's leather matched it well enough for a working hypothesis. It was the first note in a little symphony, laterite for Bruton, the bitter ghost of ammonia married to lime for the ring, and the faint suggestion of asafoetida, an Eastern condiment, lingering in the study on the first night. No English cook keeps such perfume in a gentleman's cabinet. Someone who trafficked with the East had passed through. "Captain Bruton," I said. "Bruton, yes, but not only Bruton. The choice of the ring as instrument, that was the master stroke. You will recall that our captain went straight to the drawer and fumbled it like a burglar at work for his supper. He is a bold marauder, but he has not the temperament for intimacy. No, the ring required a mind that understood where a man is most naked, in the circle he trusts. That mind was domestic, Watson. It knew the inscription, 'Until the sun forgets,' which Sir Eliot had not troubled to parade in the club smoking room. From whom could Bruton have had it save the lady who read it, when the ring warmed her husband's hand? Yet you had more than metaphor to guide you," I pressed. "You hinted at proofs, two which were enough for me, though perhaps not for a bench. First, the ivory ring-stand in her room, an indentation on the velvet where some small hoop had lately lain, but no hoop present. That told me of a ring removed, not one of her common ornaments, which were all there, but a token set apart. It was the likely pattern for the wedding band her husband wore on his right hand by family habit. The symmetry would appeal to an orderly woman. Second, the displaced trifles Sir Eliot complained of, the chair set half an inch from its station, the paper knife speared into the blotter, the bronze Apollo on the mantel with its broken lyre angled just awry. You, being charitable, took them for a valet's clumsiness. I, being less so, took them for a woman's signal. A signal to whom? To herself. A lady trapped will sometimes test the bars of her cage and leave her scratch upon them. They were the private proofs that she still had power to disturb the order that had smothered her. It is a small step from that to a more pointed disturbance. Do not mistake me, I do not excuse her. I merely read her. I merely read her. I shook my head. It is a terrible reading. Truth has a barbarous alphabet, he said. As for the mechanics, the caustic wash seated only in the trough of the inscription, so a dry cloth or a valet's cologne would not awaken it, was an intelligent use of a dull trick I have seen in the arsenals of sharper men. Harwich had the wit to do what he was told, not to invent. When I pricked the film, the faint vapour and the warmth upon the gold were sufficient to confirm the method. It needed only a moist finger and a trusting heart, and the trap for Bruton. Child's play, he returned. When a man expects a hand to open to him, you need only withdraw it, and he tumbles headlong. Harwich's removal, a light in the study, the desk made to seem hurriedly secured. He came as surely as a moth to a candle. You help neatly with your revolver, my dear fellow. Between us, we persuaded him to wait for Lestrade's bracelets. I could not but smile at the recollection. And yet the conclusion was no triumph, because the quarry I respect is intellect. Bruton's was hunger. Harwich's was fear. The one mind in the case that could have matched me chose another sphere for her battles. There are rooms, Watson, into which even I will not force my way. He rose, wandered to the window, and looked out upon the damp street, where a newsboy called the late edition. There is a codicil, he added, as if to himself. A letter came this morning from the continent. Lady Wainwright has taken a house near Menton. She writes through a solicitor that she will not contest any settlements Sir Eliot may arrange. Reading between those cold lines, I see a woman who has measured her exile and found it longer than a season. You heard from Sir Eliot as well? A brief note. He remains at his post with the company. The concession is safe. The board, with its customary wisdom, attributes their salvation to a combination of providence and their own foresight. Of the domestic chapter he says nothing. He is a man who will lock the worst cupboard and throw the key in the serpentine. We were quiet a time. The tick of our own mantel clock, steadier than the French frippery at Grosvenor Place, filled the spaces between our thoughts. Presently I said, You told him that truth burns deeper than any ring. I think it seared you as well, Holmes. He turned, and for once there was no retort upon his tongue. It scorched the vanity that would have me believe all wrongs are amenable to method. We may trace a footprint, analyze a dust, outwit a thief. But when the wound is struck under a man's own roof with his own symbol, the surgeon's hands are clumsy things. I dislike clumsiness. A knock sounded below. The bell trilled, and Mrs. Hudson's step came briskly up the stair. She entered with a card upon a tray, and her habitual apology perched upon her lips. Holmes took the pasteboard, glanced at it, and the old keen light sprang to his face as if a draught had fanned embers to flame. A curious providence, Watson, he murmured. From rings that burn to letters that vanish. Observe our new client's name. I read, Mr. Harold Vesey, Secretary to the Post Office. A vanishing letter? I echoed. Or an appearing one, he said, already reaching for his coat. Either way, there will be paper, ink, and human weakness, the trinity upon which our little profession rests. Come, my dear fellow. We have done what we could for Sir Eliot. Let us see what mischief the males contrive. And so we went out into the rinsed, shining night, leaving behind us the case of the ring that burned the hand, an affair which, though closed upon the ledger of the law, remained open in that other book, which Holmes, for all his boasted froideur, keeps hidden beneath all his instruments, the book in which he tallies not crimes, but hearts. Holmes was not a man to dwell upon past triumphs or tragedies, yet the case of the ring lingered in his thoughts longer than most. Some weeks had passed, and London, with its endless stream of new perplexities, had presented us with fresh engagements. Yet as I sat by the fire in Baker Street one evening, I found myself reflecting upon Sir Eliot Wainwright, upon his silent endurance, and upon the strange cruelty that had struck not from without but from within his household. Holmes, who had been polishing the lenses of his microscope, glanced up as if he had plucked the thought from my head. You are thinking of Grosvenor Place, he said. I confess I am, I admitted. I cannot shake the image of that poor man, bound by pride to conceal his wife's betrayal. Was there no better outcome, Holmes? No justice more fitting? Justice, my dear Watson, Holmes replied gravely, is not always the property of the courts, nor is it always dispensed by juries and judges. There is a sterner tribunal than Newgate or the Old Bailey. It is the court of private conscience. Lady Wainwright has passed her sentence already. Exile is her punishment, and memory her jailer. As for Sir Eliot, the wound he carries is the heaviest penalty of all. My work was to discover the truth, not to mend hearts. That lies beyond even my art. He rose then and stood at the window, gazing into the gaslit street below. The fog swirled about the lamps, catching their glow in shifting halos, and the clatter of hooves upon the cobbles echoed distantly. Consider, Watson, he continued, what lesson lies in this affair? A soldier turned adventurer thought to enrich himself by plunder. A servant thought to profit by disloyalty. A wife thought to assert herself by cruelty. Each was unmasked, yet none emerged unscathed. The company's secrets remain intact, but the household that sheltered them is undone. It is ever thus. The grand designs of empire may survive, but it is the private affections of men and women that prove most fragile. One cannot build security upon betrayal. I could not but agree. And yet, Holmes, though the outcome is sad, your deductions were as flawless as ever. You brought to light what no other eye could have seen. He turned with a faint smile. That, Watson, is the only consolation of my trade, that light once shone dispels the darkness, even when what it reveals is bitter. At that moment Mrs. Hudson entered with a note, which Holmes took and scanned. A gleam of anticipation lit his features. Another matter, Watson. A curious affair of a pawnbroker's ledger and a vanished violin. I believe it will prove more diverting than our last. And so, as so often before, I followed him into the night, leaving behind the echoes of a house in Grosvenor Place, where a baronet nursed his wound in silence, and a woman far away measured the bars of her chosen exile. The case of the ring that burned the hand was closed, yet its embers glowed long in my memory, a reminder that the deepest mysteries are not always written in codes or ciphered in dust, but in the hidden chambers of the human heart.